I'm Nat, and as it happens, I have ASD. I was diagnosed when I was, I don't know, like 3 or 4. At the time I was diagnosed, there were all different diagnoses. I was labelled as high functioning, which is a politically incorrect term these days, but that's what it says on my paper. So we'll go with that. I guess you could relate it to Asperger's or POD, not really knowing what it is category. But regardless of what you call it, autism has a absolutely fascinating history and even a more amazing future, I'd say. But without that, let's crack on. We were actually going to talk about why we got rid of all the terms like Asperger's, classic autism, high functioning, because long story short, people started to say, oh, I got the better autism. There's not better nor worse, it's just a spectrum. Well, at EI, we support those who fall under neurodiversity. So that could be anything from dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, anything in between. Now, we do a lot of things in the community. We deliver these for free, but we also work with companies. So first of all, a brief history of autism. The puzzle piece is the universal sign for autism on the whole, I would say. But the reason why people dislike it is that essentially you're saying there's a piece missing. And, we're just people. There's nothing missing. So that's why people are more kind of gravitating towards like the kind of infinity symbol that's colored in with a rainbow. So first of all, we're going to start at the right beginning, and the dates vary depending on what sources you look at. But the first mention of autism was in 1911, so 100 years ago, still relatively new. The term autism was first used to describe symptoms of, was it bipolar, schizophrenia, or borderline personality disorder? So this is what it was first used to describe. I can tell today's going to be controversial, so remember, this is just an opinion and I have feelings. So, yeah, schizophrenia. Autism was originally used to refer to schizophrenia. And it's because of the way kind of the demonstrations, the way it showed itself. So yes, the term has been around for a very long time. It didn't mean what we currently understand it to mean today. Now, in the 1920s, we thought, all right, we've got some funny people here. They're not acting how we're expecting them to act. How about we zap them a little bit? And electroconvulsive therapy was used to treat symptoms of autism. Now, later on, we're going to be talking about shock therapy. They are different. Shock therapy is like a little buzz. This is not so pretty. I'm going to show a little video and you'll get an idea. This was done 10 years after in the 1930s, but you see this fella, he's not having a good time. And guess what? If he was autistic going in, he's going to be autistic coming out. It's distressing, it's not nice, but the fact is, this is what we did to people that we didn't understand. And how we treat autism has been a very muddled past. And even to this day, we still do shock therapy.
I'm a bit lost. Isn't that the NHS ward they're showing here?
Well, the NHS wasn't invented at this time, but it was a precursor. Them said still do it in the US. It's kind of all a barbaric way. And though there are still research that needs to be done on the effectiveness, typically this was done in a very inhumane way where people didn't have much choice on the direction they go in. So buckle your seatbelts. The history of autism isn't that pleasant, but it gets better as we go along, but not for a while. Now, this lovely and controversial on the morning, would you cure autism if it was possible? Yes, depends, or no. So Keeley said they did that to my grandmother to treat her depression. Yeah, that was very common. So we've got no, depends. You can't cure it because it's not a disorder. Yet that hasn't stopped people from trying ever since it was first recognized. Even in the US, the biggest charity, Autism Speak, was founded on the presumption that it's something that we could cure. And that still persists today. So yes, it's backwards, but it's also very current. And you've got to ask yourself, if it could be cured, meaning could we make someone neurotypical, would you even want to? Or is there a benefit in society of having different? I would argue there's definitely benefit, but I would also argue not everyone wants to be the pioneer. No one wants to be the trailblazer. Some people just want a good, easy life. So you might want to cure it, but I don't think it's because there's inherently anything wrong with it. I think it's because life can be a real challenge sometimes. So we've got gene therapy. I would like to be normal. I would not like to be normal. I like being me. I think it's better to help rather than cure, as in to help autistic people. Yep, I completely agree with you. And do not take any of these questions as an opinion that EI or myself holds either way. It's more to just have a conversation. Next on, we're moving to Leo Kramer. He is kind of a big name in the autistic field, so you may have heard of him before. And we're currently in the 1940s now. This is where he first described characteristics of autism as a social emotional disorder. Let me know, what do you think autism is? Like, how would you explain it in like a sentence or a few words? Because the definition has consistently changed. And Craner, for those of you who do not know, he was a very intelligent man, but he was also a bit sloppy at his job. What do I mean by that? He did a lot of research, but let's just say he didn't cross the T's and dot the I's, and meant he thought autism wasn't very prevalent at all. He thought it was like a really rare condition. And as a result, there was less funding, less research. He also thought that it was caused by lack of care, due diligence, the nature versus nurture. He thought it was more about nurture. So his views are very outdated. However, it's important, and we'll get to this with Hans Asperger's, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He still did some pioneering work in researching this. Another thing you should know about him, which is important, is that he's Jewish. And that will be important in a moment, because his research may have been skewed because of his views at the time, which, as you would have known, World War II was, kicking off. So we've got difficulties with social interaction, different ways of thinking and learning, to different the brain, a developmental condition characterized by challenges, it's being different to others, norm, just do things differently. So basically everyone is saying different. But what do we mean by different? I guess we mean different to the general population. We always tend to go for the majority. And that's not to discredit the minority, but if you're only going to shape the world for one type of individual, you want to affect as many people as possible. That's probably why autistic people have missed out throughout the years. Autism often spawns creativity by the perspective it can give the person with it. Brilliant. So yeah, keep this guy in mind. The next one is, if you see, look, we've got 1943, and in 1944, we got Hans Asperger's. So these are two big names in the autism world, and they were operating at the same time. So were they aware of each other? Yeah. Like Craner definitely knew about Hans' work, but he never quoted it. If you look in any of his papers, he never mentions it. Why? Well, because one of them was arguably a fascist during Nazi Germany, and he was doing incredible work. The work he did was pioneering. At the time, he got amazing individuals, and they were people who had essentially Asperger's syndrome. But Asperger's didn't exist because it was named after him years later, I think in the 70s or 80s, or a long time after. He found people that he called as like little geniuses, and they were people who they had social deficits, or they were people who they struggled with eye contact, maybe communication, but were exceptionally intelligent. And that kind of research just didn't fit into anything that had been done before. So this person made a massive difference to the community, able to define and open up the definition, starting to really home in what it is, moving away from schizophrenia. This is where it starts to get a little bit controversial. So during the war, there's evidence to suggest he was part of the fascist regime. And was he a Nazi? No. A Nazi was someone who joined the army, who fought for it. Now, he was alive at the time. And it was only in recent years, I think it was 2013, they found some documents, which essentially is him saying, signing people off for concentration camps. He did the people who were favourable, so, you know, the classic autistic genius, he would send off to be super soldiers and, you know, help the cause. But then those who were less desirable, or those who didn't share the same unique abilities, there's evidence where he sent them off to camps where I'd be very surprised if he didn't know that they were going to their death. So did he directly kill people? There's no evidence to suggest that. Did he, however, was he complicit in his understanding of sending people and children to their death? Very possible. The other thing to consider is, did he do it because he believed in the cause, or did he do it because he had no choice and he would have been murdered in a most horrific way had he not complied? These are things that we may never know. And all we know for a fact is that he was associated and he signed papers allowing this to happen. No major contradictions. That's what I like to hear. So these two people were doing amazing work at the same time. Now, Asperger's, sorry, I'm always pronouncing that wrong, work was slightly a bit more progressive than Krainer's. But the thing is Asperger's work, you know, the war was a busy time, people were busy, his work was in German, nobody bothered translating it, it got forgotten. So the main type of autism that people became aware of was Krainer's. And for a time, it was called Krainer's disorder, which later just got kind of... So this is one where I want to know your opinion. Was he a Nazi? And I know this is a very provocative question, but it's a question which, if you Google it, it comes up all the time. So we got no, wrong place, wrong time. I think that is... I don't know about that. I mean, he was in a bad place at the right time, but ultimately he was complicit. And you cannot say... The truth is, we cannot say, was he linked? Definitely. We've got evidence that he was linked. Was he just a scientist that got wrapped up in it? We don't know. But should we define a massive group of the population by someone who has a very checkered past? Maybe not. Is that cancel culture? Well, if it is, maybe it should apply to people who were affiliated. The truth is, like, it's up for debate. A lot of people resonate with the term Asperger's, and that's fine for them. But a lot of people are kind of moving away from the term and might just use ASD now. So Damon says, remember, he was removed as a doctor to ambulance driver because reflexive practice emergencies, and I consider that a Nazi practice. Yep. Oh no, sorry, Ginny, I'm Jewish and I disagree. He practiced in genetics, and I consider that a Nazi practice. Oh, I pronounce Asperger's the same way as you do, Nat, so I don't think there's a right or wrong way to say it. Thank you, April. So that's really interesting. And if any of you are triggered by what I said, I really don't mean any harm. It's just going by with the data we have available, which in fairness is very minimal. Next on, getting a bit chilly outside, we're talking about refrigerators. But how does refrigerators relate to autism? So there's this thing, and Krainer started this discussion, and then it moved on to Bentelheim. And the refrigerator method was essentially saying, you've got autistic children? Yeah, that's your fault. So it wasn't science, it was the parents, particularly the mother, because the mother was the person who stayed at home and did the upbringing. If you were cuddling your child too much, they've got autism. If you were mean to your child, they've got autism. If you were kind of cold and frosty, like a refrigerator, it's your children's going to have autism. And people believe this. You know, I think it's North Korea or South Korea, they still believe that today. And even in parts of Europe. In America, they tend to move away from this now. But there's a massive generation of mothers and fathers who spend their whole life being shunned upon for having an autistic child. They were seen as a bad parent. So some of them just put the kid in the corner and never went out in public. They were ashamed and embarrassed because of how society would reflect on them. And this has been disproven now. There's no facts. Oh,
sorry to bump in or crash in. Yeah, it wasn't until I told my mother about the Asperger's back in the 1970s. She was told it was my fault, her fault, because she was just a bad mother. And she actually came to believe this, but this is ridiculous. But 2 weeks ago, I was able to tell her about the Asperger's, and it just lifted a weight from her. But you're almost giving a death sentence to somebody's caring nurture by saying things like this.
No, thank you for that, Daniel. It's so true. It really is really damaging to like these, and as well, the people who were doing the research on autism weren't autistic. They were white men who arguably wanted their place in history. And the guy Bentelheim, who really pushed this narrative forward, he was a massive fraud. He lied about everything. He said he was best friends with Freud. He said he had loads of degrees. He did like a 4-day course. He was a massive fraud and liar. But yet, people believed it. And we're going to be talking a little bit about vaccines later, but you know what? Mud sticks. And this is why it's really important to know your facts or research before you're making these outlandish statements, because they ripple down history for many years to come. All right, we're going into the 50s now, and parentectomy is a common treatment approach for autism. So this is where you will, if your child's acting up, just ignore them, leave them. So I want to ask you, were you ever removed from your parents for a long time when, things got hard? I would remove myself from my child for a long time. So would you ever take distance from your child? And do you think that this approach works? So essentially, it's kind of the back end of the refrigerator theory, is that you're the problem, leave them be, let them go do their thing, and they'll be fine. So it's quite interesting that a lot of people were removed from their parents, because it still was a very common practice that to separate yourself from the child. And we know today with social services, if your child's being neglected, you're taken away. And sadly, that was done for autism. People assumed you were a bad parent, so you were taken away. And thankfully, people don't do it so much today, but it is still a common practice. This is the contradiction of helicopter mothers. Oh, Ginny, tell me about helicopter mothers. Okay, now we're getting to the fun time. We're on to LSD. Who thought they were having a trip today? So in the 60s, everyone was doing it. Big Beatles fan. I'm not encouraging it, but LSD was used for a treatment for autism. Why? Does LSD work? Should I quickly phone up someone now? No. The reason why LSD was used is because nothing else worked. And people were like, you know what? Might as well try it. And there were some great, it worked in tiny, tiny amounts, but the negatives far outweighed any positives. So I really don't think we should be popping any pills anytime soon. It was untested. It was unscientific. It was like a miracle drug. And people were like, well, I might as well try it. I'm not sure what else to do. But there wasn't anything else to really back it up. Though right now there is a bit of a resurgence. Now, the question I've asked on this is, have you used any of the following? So have you used any drugs related to your autism or neurodivergence? So we've got a drug which is used for seizures. Why? Well, there's a massive link between seizures and autism. You're essentially more likely to have a seizure, and they go hand in hand. Not for everyone, for some people. The next one, we've got anti-anxiety. Anxiety and autism are two peas in a messy pod. Then we've got stimulants and focus. Again, ADHD is another common kind of add-on almost, or co-occurring condition. So a lot of people have stimulants. There's also psychoactive meds. So either pro-psychoactive or anti-psychoactive. And then again, antidepressants. So none of these cure autism, but what they do is help manage some of the related illnesses, conditions, symptoms, whatever you want to call it, that tend to have a higher prevalence in those who has been diagnosed with autism. So if you are autistic and you have any of these, it's not surprising. You're not alone. Joe said some seizure medication helps with anxiety. Yes, that's very true, and can also be used for antidepressants. I heard a lot of children being in anti-psychoactives even just because of stimming. Yep, some seizure medication helps with anxiety, brilliant, but the drugs are not used to treat my autism, they're used to treat my co-occurring disorders. Yes, Ginny, that is a really important thing to make. None of these are going to suppress autism, but what they will do is help with the things that co-occur and are probably exacerbated because of autism. Okay, we're going into the 70s now, getting a bit more up to date, and we've got the absolute legend that is Temple Grandin. She is based in Colorado. I think she works at Colorado State University, and she is a cow herder. I'm sure there's a much more impressive name for her, but I'm going to go with cow herder. So she works with livestock, and she helps give them like better lives. And while she was out in her, like, I think it was her auntie's ranch, she saw the cows kind of being like compressed when they were, I think, getting jabbed or milked. And she noticed that the cows were getting pretty chilled. And she's like, So she basically recreated it, and she made a big squeeze machine or a hug box, or it has lots of different names. And as you can see in the image, it's a machine that lightly presses against the child and kind of like secures them. And they found out that though autistic children tend to dislike hugs or physical attention on the whole, they still benefit from that sensation. So if any of you ever used to like getting in little boxes or finding little nooks, or you just feel more comfortable, this was a scientific approach. For a lot of the time, the autistic community thought, oh, a bit unethical, you can't treat a child like a cow, but she did a paper on it and there was a lot of benefits. Maybe it's not for everyone, but I kind of resonate with it. I remember going to these like big play parks with all, the soft toys, and I'd always get into the squelchy thing that kind of like squishes you and rolls you through. And I always found that very calming. So personally, I can attest to this probably working, but it's curious to know your opinions. Okay, Sarah says, I heard a lot of children being in antipsychotics even just because of stimming. Can see the effect we have in stopping through autistic kids and parents into fostering, finding hundreds of Skip the UK. Nice. Okay, cool. Next on, we're still in the 70s, and I told you about shock therapy. We're back. It's not to the extent where, you're putting things in people's mouth and you're shocking them until they're an inch of their life. This is just like a little zap. This is an example from Big Bang Theory where they were trying to show negative reinforcement. So essentially, Sheldon's down here. They're trying to get him to stop doing something. And every time they're not happy, they give it a shock. See, ouch. And the idea is the more you shock someone, the less likely they will do a similar activity. So you've got someone who's autistic, they're doing something which annoys you. You'd rather they didn't do that. Give them a zap. And then it will reinforce to their mind that that activity is a bad thing. So there's two different approaches. They're positive punishment, and this is where you add something unpleasant. So even though it's called positive, it's not a good time. Maybe you hit someone over the head with a slipper. That's positive punishment because you are adding something which someone will dislike. Negative punishment is when you take something away. So maybe you take someone like Bart Simpson, you take a skateboard away. April says Sheldon is an unintentional interpretation of someone with autism in a TV show. You're completely right, April. The script writers of Big Bang Theory says he's not autistic, but yet Jim Parsons, the actor who plays him, has based his acting method off of someone with autism. So I think that's quite an interesting one, where you can draw parallels, but it wasn't intentional, or at least to our knowledge. The method of shock therapy or assertive punishment is kind of still mainstream, and there definitely are positive results of it. We do it all the time. If any of you have been caught speeding, you'll have your driver's license taken away. That's an example of negative punishment. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it can, if abused, it can be bad. So I think it's about understanding the science and are you doing more harm than good? The jury is still out on this, but this is still a very common practice in today. Okay, next we've got auditory integration therapy. And this isn't used solely for autism, but has been more common in recent years. The practice goes, if you've got autism, you're going to be hypersensitive, sounds, light, noise, the world's all a bit much. And what this person thought is that maybe we can train the brain to get used to different noises. And so what they would do is they'd slowly play different music, different instruments, sound of birds, sounds of cards, and eventually it would get kind of more overwhelming. The idea is, you know, when you take like an injection to kind of get like, I don't know, like COVID, they give you like a tiny bit of their thing so your body can build up an immune system. It's a bit similar to that, where your brain is kind of slowly being introduced to sounds which can cause you distress, but it's done in a small enough doses which it allows the person to build up a resilience. So it's allowing you to be like desensitized. That's the theory behind it, at least. And it's quite common in parts of the US and parts of Europe, but you can just do it at home as well, to be honest. Find clips on YouTube and you can slowly start doing it with your child if you have one. I'm not sure how well it works in adults because it's normally something which, as the ears develop and your senses develop. 77. We're probably catching up to the point where some of you are born now. Oh, Jane said, I always have been sensitive / very much dislike slow talking, not in music, just normal talk. Well, thankfully, I do talk quite fast, so hopefully today's okay for you. Now, the twin study, before that long, no one knew where autism came from. You know, is it because I beat my kid? Is it because I didn't talk to him? Is it because I didn't hug him enough? Is it because I, didn't zap him enough? Why is my child autistic? Well, it turns out it was genetic, but there wasn't any proof until we did a twin study. So two twins, and the standard study is that they're the most identical version of someone for a non-biased study that you could probably possibly do unless you clone someone, which apart from like Dolly the sheep, which wasn't even at this time yet, we didn't have that technology. And they found out there is a gene associated with autism. Now, does this mean autism is genetic? Well, research is still needed, but we do know there is a link. And we also know that autism is hereditary, so it runs in the family. So if you're autistic, the likelihood is your parents could have it or your great-grandparents. With these things, the genes have like a little off and on switch and they can skip different generations. So it's quite common. It's not impossible, but the likelihood is if there's autism in your family, it's been there before. The reason why you might not know about it is, remember, autism is less than 100 years old in terms of it being a full focus. And we're still undecided on a common way of diagnosing. So it's not unsurprisingly that some people get missed or fall through the net, as they were. Now, I want to ask you, is anyone in your family autistic that you're aware of? Is it your child, your parent, your grandparent, one of your siblings, or extended family? Okay, so what have we got here? We've got April said, even though my parents are not autistic, my brother and I are. This is different way of autism running in families. Yeah, definitely. And for, maybe someone in your family a few generations back that you'll never know about might have been. Don't know, as I'm adopted. Yeeks. I'm the first one. So it's quite interesting here that no one has put grandparents, and that's probably because your grandparents were not aware of it. Why, if it wasn't even spoke about, it may have not even been around in their lifetime or when they were first born. So not surprising. Extended family, obviously that's a much bigger pool. The likelihood is autism is really common. And it started off being like 1 in a million to like 1 in 100,000, 1 in 1,000. And now roughly we're up to about 1 in every 100 people has autism. And the fact is that number could be, dropping continuously. There was a study which for the first time actually found out how many people do have autism. Rather than just being a lucky guess, they started to actually do results. And we're going to be going on to the person who really pioneered doing a good census on the rough population. Okay, here we are. So we're at Lorna Wing and Judith Gold. These two phenomenal women were complete bosses in the industry of autism. They, I think Lorna, or was it Judith, one of them had an autistic child, and they just didn't like the definition. They didn't like how it was kind of being displayed. So they did start researching. They got a bunch of children and they've worked out how many people were likely to be autistic, judging by this triad of traits. Now, I think it should be known that they got a lot of their participants from mental facilities, people who had like mental illness that were undiagnosed. So maybe not the best sample pool, but for the first time, people were actually doing real research on a larger scale. So what makes up autism? We've got social interaction, social communication, repetitive behavior. If you've got those three things, you're probably autistic. Now, if you look at their more recent studies, they actually added a fourth one. And I wouldn't use this as, your standard. You can't go around to people and think, well, you're a bit awkward, you're not great at talking, and you keep doing the same thing twice, you're autistic. This is a really oversimplified message, but it started making it more digestible for the wider public. But if you ever get a chance, these two individuals were like best friends and colleagues, and a real power couple of colleagues. Really impressive people. Now we're in the 80s, and infant autism is its own category in DSM. So for those of you who might not know, DSM is the Diagnostic Systematic Manual. It's the American Bible of mental conditions, anything that you can't touch or see necessarily. And they were continuously doing revisions. But the reason why this was quite important is they made a real effort to say there's a different one for infants. And autism was rarely diagnosed in females at this time, but also it wasn't in adults. No one ever studied it. Whenever we talk about autism, we're talking about children. And that's not cool, because as we all know, it's in all of us. But why do we not see it as much in adults? There's this thing called masking. And as we get older, we're smart people. If the world treats us different, we're going to keep tweaking ourselves so we don't get ridiculed or bullied as much. And eventually that mask becomes our daily thing that we walk around in public with all the time. So masking is the reason why autism looks very different in adults than it do children, because unfortunately we had to develop and create this mask. The Bible then, that unfortunately didn't diagnose my generation. Just because I said Bible didn't mean I said it was a good Bible, but it is the kind of standard book that people refer to. It also presents different in females than it does in males. Keely, thank you very much. That is very true. And the people who created these books and created the diagnosis typically weren't autistic, and they weren't female, and they had an agenda. So you've got to take all these things into consideration. Now, if any of you were diagnosed, or your children, or the time where you start to really resonate with being autistic, I'd love to know, what age was it? As I said, I was about, I think, 3 or 4 when I was first officially diagnosed. And it probably took me until my early adult years to actually accept it. So quite different. 4 years old in 1991. Nice. Around 10, 21. What about the ICD-10, Lisa? Yes, that's the one we use more in the UK. But I was just appealing to the most broadest audience for that one. But yes, that's absolutely 29. My mum tried at 6 years old, but they said I have friends and autistic people don't have friends. Again, not true. I think people's understanding is consistently changing. The ICD kept the Asperger's label, yes, though it's commonly falling out of favour. I reckon give it a few generations and the term Asperger's may not be around, or definitely used far, far less. At the moment, it's more of a follow-on from the past, where, no, I was diagnosed with it, I'm going to use it, even though it's not really classed anymore. So we've got 40s, my husband, 6-year-old, my daughter's 6, not officially diagnosed. So most people will be diagnosed at a young age, normally between 3 to 4, but sometimes can go to 7 for a late diagnosis. But those who are diagnosed in later years, it's tough out there. It's really tough. A label is both a blessing and a curse. A curse because it means, I can't hide from this now, but a blessing because now you get that recognition. It starts to make life makes a bit more sense. Things start to fall into place. It's different for everyone. Personally, I think it's a good thing, but whether or not you share it, that's totally up to you. Okay, 87. Intensive children behavioural therapy. This is still, to this day, the way that we support people with autism predominantly. Applied behaviour analysis, ABA, which I believe one of you mentioned earlier on, and discrete trial training, DTT, seems to work. So this is when you work like one-on-one with a child, you start helping, like, we order like speech therapy, all the kind of more like softer approaches. Essentially, we've learned that being mean to children doesn't actually work. It took some time. Now, I do appreciate in this picture, it looks like she's screaming and he's shouting at her. But from what I read, it was just a bad photo. They were doing colouring. Q said, I was a very shy child, a bit weird in marks, but being diagnosed as autistic was not something which was thought about. Very true. It has become more evident over the years that I am autistic, but it is very difficult to get proper diagnosis as an adult because I coped so many years, so why bother? Yeah, and also, because as an adult, you've learned to mask, to in your assessment, to unmask is not going to feel correct. So how do you separate what you made, like constructed to cover it up, to what is really you? The longer you mask, the harder it becomes to like separate the two and realize what is what. 1988, Rain Man, what a film. What Hoffman, what a legend. But I want to know from your perspective, if any of you have watched Raymond, if not, watch it, it's a great film. Is Raymond an accurate depiction of autism? For many years, I thought it was called Rayman, like the PlayStation game, and I was quite disappointed when I first watched it. But then after then, I realized it's a good film. Is it an accurate depiction of autism, though? Yes and no. Yes, because for the first time, autism was shown as a complementary way of thinking. That with him and Tom Cruise, they made a phenomenal team. They worked great together. Yes, because it showed autism as a real person with real skills that can add value to the world. No, because Hoffman wasn't autistic. No, because it's over stereotypical. No, because it made everyone think that everyone with autism was a superhero with amazing talents. Not the case. Some of us are lucky, some of us are not. Rayman is an accurate depiction of Salvant syndrome, not autism. Cat, is there an accurate depiction? Isn't everyone very different? Very true, Cat. I think it was a very positive first step. Would it hold up today? No. But for its time, I'm actually still quite pro it. But that's just a personal opinion. Salvant condition also occurs in intellectual disabilities independent of autism. My mum once confused a Rayman computer game with Rayman. Nice, I'm glad I'm not the only one. My son looks a lot like Rayman. Rayman, cool. Daniel Drake. I don't know what is weird is the age difference in Cruise and Hoffman. I have difficulty believing they are brothers. No, they were just two famous people. But what I do like about it is Hoffman actually did a lot of research into autism. The person who the film was based off of, he spent a lot of time with and a lot of like research. So yes, it might not be the most accurate portrayal, but I do think it's not a film like Music, which or song music that came out last year or so, that we should completely throw away. So Lisa says, it's an accurate depiction of one single autistic person, not an autistic person as a whole. We aren't a monolith. I like that. I think let's leave on that comment because that one makes the most sense. It's an accurate depiction on one person with autism. Could it have been done better? Yes. But for its time, was it a positive step? I think it was overall more positive than negative. However, the stigma of Rain Man still lives on. So it depends, as most things with autism. All right, now we're on to Bart Simpson, 1997. We're in the 90s. We're almost at present day. Special education programs for autism. They've suddenly become a thing. Schools have realized we should probably help someone. Let's not lock them up. Let's not inject them with medication. Let's look after them. If you are autism, or if you are autistic, or anyone you know, did you ever have much support in these areas? So on this one, all you do is rate them. I think it's out of 5. So if you got a lot of support in writing, you'd go to 5. If you didn't receive any support, it would be like 0. I did receive support in school, but I think it was mainly for dyslexia. With autism, I got speech therapy, which I think is more related to a co-occurring condition. But the truth is the teachers did not understand it that well, unless you've got a teacher who is specialised in it. And normally they do not have enough time because there's more students than there are teachers that are specialised in it. If you see this graph here, it's actually not that great because most people have said they didn't get support. They had support in socialising, a little bit in behaviour, but not so much in the things that actually made a difference, like writing and reading and attendance. Kat says, I did receive a report with mathematics, even though I was not diagnosed with anything. Daniel, I was taken out of class or put in the lowest grade. Yeah, Yasoda, I tended to be mainly behaviour. Yeah, I was always taking out of my classes. I was in all the bottom sets. You know, I don't like to brag, but, you know, there's some stuff going on in there. But yeah, I was always in the bottom sets. And it's because the bottom sets was essentially SEN, special education needs, and low ability went hand in hand. No, they're different. You know, stop treating me. Yes, I have additional needs, but that doesn't affect my intelligence. And I think that's still a crucial mistake that schools do to this day. They essentially put 2 completely different demographics in the same little bowl together, give them the same work, the same support, and then they expect remarkably different results when you're capping someone's potential or you're making someone else feel dumb or inadequate. Not cool, school system. Now, vaccines. You can't talk about autism without talking about vaccines. Does vaccines cause autism? No, but a lot of people still think that. So the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, everyone said it was autism. The actual report which first stated it discredited it. They burnt it. They decided no. The people even said it was made up on pseudoscience or misquoted. Yet for some reason, people still believed it. You know, autism, mumps. I'm going to go with the mumps. And this has had negative repercussions even up to today. Many people still not get their children vaccinated because of, autism. There is zero truth in this. Zero truth. What do you think causes autism? Again, a very controversial one, but this is anonymous. Do you think it's to do with genetics? Do you think it's about vaccines? You know, if you do, that's fine, I guess. You know, that's your opinion. Is it upbringing, more like refrigerant mother method, or is more research needed and you couldn't possibly say? Okay, so most people think genetics, and I do think it's genetics, but I think that we do have to do more research. It's both of them, right? It's likely to be genetics, but the fact is we do not know. It points to genetics, but more research is needed. We do know, though, that it's not upbringing. The research doesn't point to that. We know that it's not vaccines. There's zero research to support that. There's a lot of research on genetics. So though I am not saying it's a definitive cause, it's looking likely, but we need to really hit home on it. What causes neurotypicalness? Very good question. Always good to return it around. So we're up to modern day. This is the last one. ASD is called autism spectrum disorder. Why? Because people started saying, oh, you know, I'm Asperger's, you know, I'm better than classic autism. And it made some people amazing. Some people felt not very great. So they thought, you know what? Let's just call it ASD, because the science from the genetics has proven that there isn't like a different gene. It's not like people with Asperger's looks completely different from someone with classic autism. They look the same. It's just how it represents itself different. So until new technology or definitions come out, they thought, you know what? It's the same thing, and we're going to stick with that. That being said, a lot of people do not resonate with that. So do you personally resonate with having just autism? Do you resonate with Asperger syndrome, or do you resonate with neurodivergent? or neurodivergence. The last one is the most modern one. I think it also came out around 2013, the movement. And essentially this is like wiping the slate clean. It's like, I'm bored of all these negative associations. Let's create a new word which better defines the positives and the strengths. I'm still undecided, to be honest. I mean, I just go with autism. I think more people understand it. Neurotypical, I like the word, but words can easily be made and destroyed overnight, depending on who knows, really. Kelly says, I don't like the term disorder. I'm autistic. I don't like neurodivergent because they are all neurodivergent because everyone processes information differently. Yep. I like the term neurodiversity because it is referring to the entire population. And that's okay with me. Disorder, not cool with. Autistic spectrum condition, I prefer, but some people don't like the word condition. You can't please everyone, but ultimately we have to call it something. But just because we have a name we've settled on doesn't mean that we can't keep pushing the conversation. Oh yeah, so if you like today, get in touch, standard stuff. But if you do have any questions, do email us. And to know that to email us is just admin@accept.co.uk or just Nat, N-A-T. Today has been a controversial one, I cannot lie, but if anything, it proves a point that the jury is still out and autism is a very misunderstood and very confusing subject. So I hope you enjoyed the session today. And if any of you have any amendments or suggestions you'd like me to make for future sessions around this subject, I'm all ears, so please do drop me an email. But thank you so much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Oh, and will there be a part 2? There is going to be one in the future called The Future of Autism, which is really exciting. And there's also one called The Science of Autism, which I'm really excited about. The science of autism is fascinating. Bye all.